So I wanted to start off while we're waiting for some more questions to come in, asking a question about both, I think, to Dave and Sue about the value add of EAN. So in my mind, one of the values of a network like EAN is that it has the ability to bring diverse stakeholders together from across sectors to align and coordinate and catalyze big shifts across the system. So forgive me, I'm not an expert in either of the things that you're talking about, but one question I have is, for both of your proposals, it seems like there are already people who are doing deep work and thinking about these issues. So what's the value add of having this be a priority for EAN? Will the work move forward without EAN? And is this the most strategic thing that the network collectively can be working on at this moment? And if so, why?
Interests. What's so interesting is, look, we have done a lot in Vermont to advance investment and use of public transportation. It will surprise you, but probably not Neil, to hear that among rural states, if you look at per capita, we actually spend the most on public transportation. But that solution alone isn't going to solve the kinds of challenges and address the social costs that we are talking about with our proposal. And every one of the organizations with whom I am now working in this whole world of social services alone can't come up with the solution, the funding, the opportunity. It is only when we think in a collective sense. And I think that is the power of EAN. It is a network. And by the way, I would like to add one more question, because Carolyn did this wonderful thing of stand up if you represent or work for an organization today that is actually working on economic inequality, working with low-income Vermonters. How many? A few. Okay, that's the most important thing, that unless we are growing all of these interests, we're not solving it. So that to me is key. I think I described to you that we are part capstone of a network on the ground, boots on the ground, frontline service providers, all of whom recognize transportation is key. Current systems aren't doing it. We got to think as a network. So that's my.
That's a great question. If you hadn't noticed, I ran through my presentation really quickly, and I left a lot of things rather vague. To say that the legislature has to come up with criteria that might inform how the RPCs go about doing their work, that's something that EAN could really help folks think about. EAN brings together, there's so many sharp people that come to these meetings, participate in this. That's just one example of what I was saying. I think it's not the devil's in the details, but it takes some thinking, and it takes some tailor-made solutions. Environmental justice and equity in northern New Jersey, entirely different from equity and environmental justice in Vermont. And so I think EAN is perfectly suited to helping with those questions.
One more thing I want to say, because my point was going to be, we can't do it through the legislature. We can't do it through the public sector. I know we need investors. We need entrepreneurs. We need great thinkers from this great institution to help us with coming up with our platform, our technology. We're just beginning, and we need all of the network to help.
Okay, great questions. Thank you. It's, if you're checking those out, let's do a question for Norway, please. And I think there's several good questions around this. Linda, quick data one, if you happen to know, consumers' cost per gallon of gas or diesel in Norway. That was one of the questions. Another question was, how do you fund transportation system improvements? If I'm thinking of the cigarette model, if you're taxing the polluters a lot and that's going down, how do you fund transportation system improvements? And lastly, as Luke Schellenberger mentioned from Green Lantern earlier, I wonder if, I'd love it if you drew the connection between Norway's ability, they dredge up more oil than Kuwait and several other Middle Eastern countries in terms of how much oil they actually use to produce, and I wonder how much they use those revenues to subsidize this kind of program. Any thoughts on how we reconcile that work in the climate question? So, cost per gallon. How do you pay for transportation investments? And they seem to have a big wad of cash they can throw this through their North Sea oil stuff.
Yeah, cost per gallon, I'm not sure what it is. It changes all the time. My guess is it's around $6 per gallon, something along those lines. That in Europe, that can range in that range. The second question was in terms of transportation investment.
Yeah, funding transportation. If I guess it's an extrapolation of the Vermont model. Here in Vermont, all sorts of transportation fees go to keep the roads paved.
Okay,
And
yeah.
Sue knows a little.
So yeah, definitely. I mean, Sue definitely knows that. So part of what they do with the polluter pays principle is that if you are going to be contributing to adding to greenhouse gases, you pay a fee, and you pay a stiff fee on your car, your vehicle, when you purchase it. If you're not contributing to that, you don't pay a fee. And they have a whole formula that I'm happy to share that they look at what emissions are in any vehicle, and that generates actually quite a bit of income for them to be able to utilize, not only for EV incentives and other programs, but also for transportation infrastructure investments. With respect to the oil drilling, that's absolutely true. They do drill for oil in Norway, and they tax that enormously. They do have extra cash from drilling in Norway, and obviously we do not have that. But I would go back to when they look at what the impact of the various policies have been, they use a lot of those fees, not for switching to EVs. They use those fees for other investments in the country. The main income for their EV policy comes from that fee-based type of policy, which is something that we could potentially enact here in Vermont. So just wanted to make that distinction.
Hey, Carrick, I just wanted to make a point about paying for infrastructure. Thinking about it as, what do we do with EVs? Can EV registration solve our problem? Oh, EVs aren't using gas, they're exacerbating our problem, I think is the wrong starting point. I think if you think about weight, width, and vehicle miles traveled, you get at cost causation. What's beating up the roads more? What's not beating them up as much? Are there any taxes that are going to electricity that EVs are using that could be directed toward infrastructure? So look at all the cost causers, all the users, and come up with something rational.
I would reiterate the vehicle miles traveled. I think that's a really important thing that we need to think more seriously about, that is what's using up the roads. So you can put fees on vehicle miles traveled as one indication.
So we have a couple questions here about the car share. One is Montpelier had a car share program that ended after a short stint. Are there lessons learned there? How would your program differ? Is the demand there?
Sure. So we have spoken with Annie over at Vermont Car Share. She was quick to point out that when she started it, it was called Car Share Vermont and not Car Share Burlington. So they're certainly anxious to find a way to venture into less dense areas of the state and make the model work. But as you can imagine, with the car share model, demand is an issue, and that immediately gets to density. So one of the things that we're trying to do is understand, well, look, there's a lot of unmet transportation demand in Washington County. How can we bring together people and systems and things to be able to create enough demand to sustain a car share? That's a part of it. How can we bring in a partner like Car Share Vermont or anybody else and not expect them to bear the burden, the financial burden of trying to make a shared resource work in a place that doesn't have a lot of density? So that's a key part of what we're trying to build. A key part of what we're trying to do in terms of bringing a coalition together of people who have transportation demands. I also saw on the screen somebody asking about our timeline. This is something we're looking to do very quickly. This is something we're hoping to have and expecting to have operational by the end of 2020. There was another question on there that gets to that, which is broadband access. How can you think you're going to have a ride-hailing service out in the woods where there's no internet? I want to point out that we're not approaching this as there's a technological fix for this or there's any other particular fix. We have a problem we're trying to address, and quite honestly, if the ride-hailing service has to start as somebody with a telephone, a spreadsheet, and finger puppets, that's what we're going to make happen. It's not going to be dependent on, we're not going to not address these issues in a way that we think can work because we're worried about internet access.
I just want to elaborate that I think we are aggregating what we know is to be demand, that probably the car share attempt in Montpelier didn't have the connectivity with organizations that depend on and have resources that they devote towards getting people where they go. There are disparate pots through the Agency of Human Services, through the Agency of Transportation that assist a small number of people to get where they need to go. The hospital is now a huge player in this, recognizing that with our reform of our healthcare delivery system, they are on the hook if people do not get to their doctor's appointments, and this is real. So we are now really around the table trying to think about this together and bringing the cooperatively owned fleet of electric vehicles as the fleet and marrying that with what we know to be demand is really the different thing that we're looking at. As much as we are committed to making this happen in the next year, it's fully dependent on investors and partners like you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe the three of you could speak to how you feel like your particular proposals might complement or support each other. Or are there ways in which you think they might?
I'll take that. In a comprehensive policy with incentives, the incentives should absolutely be targeted to low and middle income Vermonters. That's who we need to help go forward. And this, I think, would be an ideal way to focus whatever public funds we have available, either through VW settlement or through TCI or through something new like a fee-based program, targeted first and foremost to low and middle income Vermonters, and especially with shared.
And I do want to recognize and thank the legislators in this room who, in the last session, really tried to address this in the transportation bill. In addition to subsidizing all electric vehicles with the VW settlement money, they did agree to a very small program that we're going to help administer to really get actually used, I noticed the used cars, used electric and hybrid high efficiency vehicles into the hands of low-income people through our transportation program. I know that GMP is working to do that as well as VED. We're going to be doing it in a different format, and this is exactly what can start to make the difference. We, yes, need all electric, and we also need to get folks out of gas guzzlers and into more high-efficiency vehicles. So we absolutely need those, and I think that we're starting a pilot that the TCI future revenues can help support.
I would just add that an important thing that we haven't paid as much attention to in Vermont as I think we could is the notion of the cash for clunkers. So in shared vehicles as well, now that EVs, new models are coming along that are bigger vans that are possible to use, we need to be putting money into getting those high emissions vehicles off the road and replacing them with EVs.
So I think what we just heard.
What is that,
I
David?
think what I've just heard from these folks, what I propose could be consistent with that. The point is with policy folks, it's their job to have the answers and they come up with answers. What I'm proposing is that we go out to the towns using RPCs and be culturally sensitive enough to explore with locals what they think they need and try to match it up with these great policies we're hearing about. Just listen to people out there. It's a bottom-up view of the world.
Okay, let's try and, there's some great questions and great points. I want to make sure let's finish with a flourish here in the last few minutes that we have. So here's some quick questions. Just give me the quick things: sticks, carrots, and tambourines that we heard Jared talk about. Each of you, give me your biggest stick, your biggest carrot, and your best sounding tambourine. Go, please.
I think we're all tambourines on this end.
Okay.
Actually, you've got it. Sticks, carrots, tambourines.
I like the idea of a sharp stick that's painted orange. It looks like a carrot. So you
Oh, deceptive.
And yeah, I'm trying to work with your carrot.
Okay, well, you're not working very well. Let's
It's really
go.
difficult sometimes.
Come on. Come on. Come on.
I think encouraging, coming up with some revenues to do some of, the many things that people here know need to happen.
Okay.
And recognizing everybody else, and maybe going out with a tambourine and trying to whip up some of the folks who are naysayers. That's the ticket.
I think the comprehensive policies that I proposed include the sticks, which are you need to raise money, and that money has to come from somewhere. A polluter pays principle makes sense. The carrots are absolutely help those who need the most help to be able to make that transition and use those incentives, use cash for clunkers, everything that you can do on that front. And then the tambourine is we need to invest in that awareness and marketing to help people understand that this is actually a cheaper, cleaner, healthier alternative moving forward, and that these opportunities and incentives are there.
I'd like to go back to something that Jared said that I'm going to steal for future presentations, but the idea that this is a tremendous opportunity presenting itself as a challenge. And the idea, we have these grand challenges. Obviously, we're speaking today about one of them. Alleviating poverty is another one. Social justice is another one. Vermont economy and how we're going to continue to move forward as a state and draw people here and be a vital place to live is another. I'm a fan of a quote that is attributed to somebody, and I can't think of who right now, that when you're looking at a problem and you can't solve it, make it bigger. All these things are tied together in my mind through the economic things that we're talking about, the economic opportunity we're talking about.
Love it. Okay, last question. No, I actually did. That was good. Anything, Sue? Okay. This is an incredibly powerful and I think effective audience. This audience knows how to get stuff done. So rather than, I love what you said, Jim, rather than go to your biggest obstacle in front of this crowd here, what's your biggest hope and what's your challenge to this team? What's your ask of them to help with your specific initiative? Quickly, please.
I really want investors to help us get this first fleet off the ground. I want to use EAN to be stimulating that network. I need a group of really big thinkers who are entrepreneurial, who understand how to make the connections to lift this up. This is a pilot that is needed across this country. It's not just in Vermont. It's been tried. It hasn't been tried like this before. So I'm all in, and I need you.
So energy efficiency was a complementary policy sort of sweet spot for Reggie because it allowed reductions in carbon at low cost and it protected consumers. Think about what sort of policy combos that you might come up with that'll work for rural Vermonters, low-income Vermonters, seniors.
I'd like to ask the legislators to look at a comprehensive set of policies that looks at the biggest GHG emitters in our state. A comprehensive set. I know you've tried really hard and we've had a lot of small pieces that are helping us get there. But now is the time to do it comprehensively. And we need the utilities on board, the efficiency utilities as well as the electric utilities, and the gas utilities and the fossil fuel dealers. But mostly I feel like what we did for solar way back and helped get an entire industry off the ground, we need to do in a massive, comprehensive way in transportation that focuses principally on the lowest and middle-income Vermonters to get it done. And so I would really ask that we put a whole big effort, not in a piecemeal approach, but a comprehensive approach at the legislature.
Thank you. So let's give it up for our fabulous presenters. Thank you. They'll be around, so if you have other questions, feel free to approach them directly.